don't want to know. The project.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have one of my latest projects on the slide show that took me a long time. Yeah. But it's kind of paid off.
There's something important.
Oh, yeah. Did you have a good swim? Oh, yeah. Good. Welcome, folks. So the exhibit is wild landscapes, Wallowa County, North and Grandma, the Grandma River, and St. Photos. So right now, you just actually have a Jude There's a pot of coffee over there, fresh plums. Sharp, oh, excuse me.
So, we don't have much of an audience, but we've got Mark Lacey for sure, and we have Jude Graham who's going to tell us about the museum and her work there, and we're recording this, so if you miss it, or I don't know if it's streaming too. It's streaming too, so we might have some people out there, and then we'll have the recording later, but we're going to learn. How long have you been at the museum, been director? 2 years?
2 years.
2 years. Well, there are some great changes down there, and if you haven't been for a few years, you should just go in and front there and take a look around. Anyway, so I'm going to turn it over to Jude for her program on the Wallowa County Museum.
Thanks, Rich. Watch your legs.
You're going to get in trouble, is what you're going to get.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to talk about Wallowa County Museum, a little bit about its history, and a little about what we do there. Hopefully you have fun with the conversation, and I know there's people online that are listening. The guys will let me know if you have questions, I'm sure. So, funding. It's like all nonprofits, we get our funding in a lot of different ways, but the museum is actually funded by you, individuals that come in the door, that make donations, and that pay an admission fee. We're not funded by the city, the county, or the state. Your admission fee is what keeps us operating. If you can see the picture in the top left, that's actually a hinge that is on the front doors of the museum. And those hinges, come to find out, were made in Pennsylvania and shipped out here. There'll be more about that in a minute. Behind these doors are lots of stories. Time is transformed. We've had people walk in there, and we usually ask people to turn off their cell phones because that museum, when it was built in 1888, there were no cell phones. And so it was an entirely different time. And all of the docents in there can tell you more stories than I possibly can recount today. If you notice the doors on the right, those doors are about 10 feet tall. And they were shipped in from the East Coast and handmade, and the glass in them is the original glass. So we try to keep it historic and so that you can enjoy the look and the design of it. So the museum houses many rooms. It's about 4,000 square feet. The artifacts are all from Wallowa County. Every single artifact was used by someone here. Nothing was bought for an exhibit or a display, which kind of makes the museum unique and in some ways makes it harder to curate. But it makes it a challenge and it's fun. So we have all of these exhibits in there. Nez Perce or Nibipu room, everything in there was used by the tribe at some point in their existence, and there's some very unusual artifacts in there. We have a woman's jail out in the back, a sheep herder's wagon that we'll talk about a little later, a World War I exhibit, medical exhibits with things all across the board in the medical field, from a child's coffin that luckily was never used, that was made in Flora. And a lot of people didn't know that our local coffins were made in Flora and shipped up here, either adult or child. We have a World War II exhibit that is only the people that fought in World War II from Wallowa County. We have some amazing stories about those people that left our county and fought for our country. And those stories can be told to you by the docents that work there. The picture on the right is when the left-hand side of the building was still our fire hall. And that is now part of the museum, what makes up the 4,000 square feet of museum. We're digitizing our entire collection right now, which doesn't seem like a big project until you see the amount of pages and what's there and the complexities of it. The picture on the right is from a Horner scrapbook. So J.H. Horner saved a lot of the artifacts we have, and his scrapbooks are 2 feet by 17 inches by 4 to 5 to 6 inches thick. Okay, one of them has over 200 pages. He put items on both sides of those pages, so that's actually 400 pages if you think about it. And you have to lift up a page to see the page underneath it because he used blank pages to glue things to. So when you're thinking about photographing something like that and having to be careful, because we are not going to take apart his scrapbooks. They're always going to stay just like he made them. But every page has to be photographed. So sometimes you'll end up with pages you can't quite see the top because he's glued them in there or taped them in there. But amazing history. There's one small scrapbook that is 100% Nez Perce tribe. There are scrapbooks that are his letters to people and their answers back. It's just an amazing collection. We've digitized about 2,000 photos. We probably have another 10,000 to do, and that's only a guesstimate. Genealogy things, glass negatives, we've transferred to digital now. And pages like this that I found fascinating. And one of the hardest things ever is not to read them. Okay? If you're a historian and you love history and you find a page like this and you start to read it, then you're purely going down that rabbit hole because you're going to spend hours in this 13-page letter. And this was written to Horner in the late 1800s, and if you can see it, the top towards the left, you can see the word Indian. Those are the location, that's a map of where the Indian gardens were in Imnaha. And I have talked to so many people that have never seen that map. it's just fascinating. And so when we get it, everything digitized and shareable, it'll be a lot of fun to be able to share with people. Her letter was amazing, and I'll admit I read the whole thing, all right? I just had to. I couldn't pass it up. Other letters were just incredible. This was written in 23, and it was talking about the Revis place and how they started that area. So these letters written back to Horner contain so much valuable history of our area. And so we have people now that are reading through them so that we can find some tidbits that we want to share with everybody. Another thing that he did was keep a lot of photos. This is a photo out of one of his scrapbooks. And on the back, it said Enterprise Businessman. And I know who Blanchard is, and I know who Yates Young is, but that's the only two out of the picture I know.
There's the Chinese guy.
That's Yates Young, and he worked at the Blanchard Hotel as a cook.
Oh, okay.
Yes, and he lived here for a lot of years, and there were probably a dozen Chinese families that lived in Wallowa County from early 1900 to about 1923. And Hop Lee worked for the Mitchell Hotel, and he ran the laundry there. So there's a lot of stories about the people that lived here and what they did for a living, and the restaurants they owned and being cooks and such. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So Blaine Hayes asked me if I knew anything about Chinese digging any of the irrigation ditches. Have
Yeah.
you heard anything like that?
Yes, there was a man in here, and I think his last name was Jung, and it might have been Kim Jung. I could look it up for you. He helped on some of the irrigation ditches. And there were about 2,000 Chinese that came up from a company in San Francisco that hired these people to come up and be labor on the railroads, and they helped dig ditches and help build roads. And
Do you have confirmation of that company or them doing road building or digging here?
I have confirmation of them helping with the train lines, the rail lines.
Oh, okay.
And I only have anecdotal stories in some of Horner's diaries pages about helping with building ditches and roads. And on a couple of pictures, it said this was a Chinese guy and here's his name, and he helped on a ditch. So, but they're very anecdotal, just written on the back of pictures and stuff, and in diary notes. So I have a little bit, not as much as I'd like.
More than I've ever heard, so good for you.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to research. I was able to, years ago, research a Japanese family in the Portland area that was sent to Minidoka, and the kids came to me and they wanted me to do research on it. Took me 2 years to find out the whole story for them, but it's time consuming, but it's possible. We'll talk more about that because we could get together on it and try a couple of ways to find more of that history. We have DVDs, VHS, cassettes that all have to be digitized. If anybody's bored this winter, let me know. I probably have 100 DVDs on oral histories of the county. So, artifacts, maps, these are one of my favorite things that Horner saved. I have about 60 maps like this. They're all hand-drawn. That one's the lake, of course, because I figured everybody would know what it was. And on there, if you could read it, it'll say in 1888, Joe bought this property. And so I have almost the whole county in these maps, and they're fascinating to read. And a lot of the common names you would expect are on there. And you can find out where their property was in the 1880s to about 1904. But they're all hand-drawn in colored pencil, and they were drawn by Horner when he worked for the courthouse. He drew those, yes. J.H. Horner, fortunately, was our first historian. He was single. He kept everything, okay? We're talking everything. Envelopes, and I've got them, and things that you might not think are historic, but turns out in 2023, some of it is very valuable information. And he wrote letters to Otis Half Moon and all of these people that are historic names around here, and we have their letters back answering his questions. So we owe him a lot on our history. That's a sample of one of his scrapbooks, and they're not beautiful on the outside, but the inside to a historian, they're priceless. So this is kind of a fun photo. If you notice that rock, there's 7 men standing on it. It weighs 3,910 pounds. Okay, I can tell you where it is, but it took me a little bit of time to figure it out. The building on the far right, where the arrow is, the blue arrow, is where the fire hall was at the museum. So the brick building next to it is the museum, okay? That building was the fire hall. Where the red arrow is, that's the bar at Stubborn Mule, okay? So behind the men, you see roof line there going in. That's where the rock went. So someplace under the dining room of the Stubborn Mule is an almost 4,000-pound stone. So I went to Gary Bestscheider, who owns Stubborn Mule, and I said, Gary, do you know there's a 4,000-pound, almost 4,000-pound rock under there? And he didn't. They didn't hit it when they were putting in his foundation. But it was in front of the Stevenson building, and Stevenson was a stockbroker in the late 1800s here in the county. But can you imagine loading a 4,000-pound rock? This is just part of the foundation of the building. This isn't the whole building, all right? And so I thought it was kind of a fun photo. It was taken about 1900. We digitized glass negatives, and I put a few of my favorites on there for you because I just thought the little kids were fun. And do I know who they are? No, I don't. They're a mystery, but they're kids here in the county. That was also on a glass negative, and it's the McDonald family, who it's a Nez Perce tribal picture. And I've seen it on the internet several times in various looks, and we actually have the original glass negative that we've digitized now. So see the item with the arrow pointing to it. I brought it today. It's in this white box. And when you find an item and you don't know what it is, you have to research it before you can display it. And I showed this to a lot of people, and not many people, we all had guesses, okay, as to what it was. And we're going to kind of go down the rabbit hole, because I'm going to tell you how I found out exactly what this item is. And it took about 1.5 years, all right? This wasn't an easy process. So trying to find out the story of an artifact is one of the most difficult things, because you want to prove it beyond belief so that you tell the right story when you display it. And so first I had to find out what it was, and I found this basalt item in a storage room at the museum. No label on it, nothing. I have the accession card, all right? And it was given to Horner, to J.H. Horner, by the Kaufman family. And in about 1900, Mrs. Kaufman, while riding her horse on a trail at their ranch in Elk Mountain area, just found this, just the point of the item was sticking out of the ground, and it was stone. That's what the note typewritten from J.H. Horner said. That's all I knew. So this map is where the red dot is where the Kaufman Ranch was. If you can see that, it's not terribly bright. That was their house and barn on Elk Mountain. And it's out of Columbia Basin basalt. And if you see on the right-hand side of this map, it says extent of Grand Ronde basalt. It came over into Wallowa County. And basalt is from volcanic action. And we have several areas of it here. And one of the biggest areas that we know the Nez Perce got basalt out of was out Highway 3. And everybody kind of agrees to that. And so we're making the assumption, if this was carved here in the county, that this basalt piece came from that area, okay? Because if you think of the Nez Perce tribal areas, which was a huge area up into Idaho and Montana, the biggest collection was right here in the county. And they made, we know, a lot of their arrowheads and stuff down here because we have so many rocks. Everybody in Wallowa County that has a yard or a ranch here knows that. There's rocks everywhere. But anyway, that's kind of where the basalt comes from. So when I talked to various people, the number one thing that I was told was it's got to be some sort of war club, okay? And it's similar to the coastal war clubs. So I did this whole research on coastal war clubs, and you'll see some examples on the left top picture and the middle picture that are very eccentric ones that I would love to have a copy of. And then somebody thought it was a type of strange pestle, which the bottom right is, or an adze. And it wasn't any of those, because the look just wasn't right, okay? And although the coastal war clubs were made out of basalt, it wasn't quite the right look. And then people said, maybe it's ceremonial. It kind of looks like a cross. Well, if you know the Nez Perce tribe, they weren't into crosses too much. It wasn't a thing back in those days. And so I still wondered about that. And they were all great ideas, and every single one of them I researched. So then people told me, well, talk to some archaeologists. I talked to an archaeologist in Portland, one in Seattle, one up in Nez Perce tribal land, reservation land, some in different areas. And then somebody says, well, you need to talk to the National Museum of the American Indian, which is part of the Smithsonian. And I did, and I sent everybody pictures and dimensions and all of that. And they would all send me to somebody else, okay? So this took months and months and months. And I talked to Peach State Archaeology, and they were very nice. And then you know what happened one day? This young man and his parents came into the museum, and they happened to tell the docent at the front desk, well, our son just graduated from college with his master's in archaeology, and he went to Montana State. And the person at the front counter knew that I had been frantically researching this item, and she came back to me and she said, do you want to talk to this young man? I go, why not? Because I have literally talked to people all over the United States. And he came in, and he was not only excited, he was elated. And he said, you know, I think I've seen something like this that was broken. And I go, really? So he immediately got on a Zoom call to 3 of his professors, and he showed them pictures, and we laid out a ruler, and we showed them the backside and everything. And these 3 professors were so excited, and they knew what it was. And I'm going, wow. It took a young man in his mid-20s walking into my museum to answer this question that I have been calling all over the United States for. And so Montana State University sent me the pictures of They had done archaeological digs along the trail that the Nez Perce and in the campsites, and they had seen broken pieces of this, and one of the professors has come to town and looked at it because he wanted to see it in person. So he drove down from Montana to see one artifact and then drove home. And it was very fun, and I will finally tell you what it is. All right, so there's a close-up in the top picture. We know it's basalt. You see the red arrow. That end was used, they would wet hide, and then they could use it to drill hole and hide. And I'm going, of course. I didn't think of that. Remember, the Nez Perce were nomadic, and lots of times the men would take off on a trip without the women. So they wouldn't have everything that they used every day, like pestles. So where the blue area is, they use that to grind camas root and grain. I'm going, wow, this is really cool. So that person that had told me it's a weird pestle was the closest of any guess. And then the crossbar was used like a billy club or a baton. And they said specifically if they caught fish, like in the Snake River, that weren't dead when they brought them in, they could hit them over the head, that type of thing. The back is rough, okay? And they said that was to take fat and sinew off the hides. It was the first multi-tool, okay? The Swiss Army knife, yes. And so I asked these guys, they said, on the back of it, when you feel it, I've put gloves on and felt it, it feels like there's ridges in there. And they said, well, yes, because a man would make it, he would use it during his life, his son would inherit it, he'd use it during his life, his son would inherit it, and so that's from their hands gripping this tool. And when I get a couple of $1,000s, I'll probably have it tested to find age. Their guess was 400 to 500 years old, and that's purely a guess. But all of that to find out it was a Swiss Army knife or a multi-tool. So there's my story about that. It was kind of fun, and it was truly going down the rabbit hole. Okay, so this item, in some cases, you never know. It's metal, so I'll pass it around to you guys. Don't touch it. I don't know what's on it, and it does have sharp points. But it opens up, and we figure it's some sort of latch, okay? And I have had all the usual subjects. Do you want to come up and grab this? And then somebody in the back row, just keep it. I've had all the normal people come and look at it. I've had tourists come in and look at it. Everybody kind of thinks it's to attach a wagon to something else or attach metal to something else. But it comes apart. There's a pin that comes out of it, and it opens up. And it took us almost 3 months to get the pin out without damaging it. So anyway, if anybody knows what it is, let me know. I have weird things in the museum. This is our historic sign, the bottom one, coming into town. The top one is the original. And sometimes you get things and you say, do I restore it? The top picture is the one that's hanging in the wall in the museum. And that was the very first kind of welcome to Joseph sign. And it's in bad shape. My choice was, don't restore it. Show it to people in its historic look. And it was stored in a barn for many years. The bottom picture is probably one of our most famous residents, Walter Brennan. And if you don't know who he was, you're young. But he was a movie star who moved his family here. And kind of an amazing guy in his own right. Our building, it's interesting. We have found blueprints of the building. And one of the things we found in the blueprints was where Macaulay's office was. And Macaulay was the man that built our Italianate style building. And because of these blueprints, we found that his office was a room that was little used in the museum. That was the door to it. And from the 1970s, mid-1970s to 2022, it was a storage room, okay? And then we found the blueprint and we said, oh, it was Macaulay's office, and it's this little tiny room, but everything in there he used. And one of my favorite things in there is with the red seal. That's the original 160-acre donation land claim for where you're sitting, the city of Joseph. Macaulay owned the city of Joseph. He was the first one to buy the entire town. And I found it fascinating. I got it from a lady in Chicago who was a Macaulay descendant, okay? So we get things shipped in from all over. So it was, huh?
I just spent some time with David Weaver yesterday,
Yes,
and I learned that oftentimes people, rather than homestead, went back to the preemption act and just paid $1.25. I think it was $1.25 per acre.
yes,
And bought it outright.
yes.
So that, he didn't homestead,
Nope,
he bought it.
yes,
Right.
yes.
And that's how our government made money before it taxed people that sold Indian land.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Yep, absolutely. He built the first power plant that ran power to Joseph. And it served our needs sort of until 1909. But one of the very first places that got power is RuPaul, and I'll show you a picture in just a moment. So the other thing I brought, which I'll just show you because it's got splinters, but it looks like this. Does anybody have a clue what it is? There's two of them on the outside of our building that you can see in the shadows where the blue arrow is. Okay, it's all wood. I'm holding it precisely correct.
Glass insulator fit on the end of that?
So, very good question.
Because it looks like what my grandparents had on their old farm.
Right. And they're on several buildings in Wallowa County, and I get questions all the time. What are those things? Here it is with the insulator on it. And that's where the power first came in to the bank. Because remember, when we were built in 1888, we were the first bank of Joseph. And so that's exactly what it is. And so one of the very first places that had electricity was RuPaul. And if you see the blue or kind of black arrow, that was RuPaul. It was a 2-story building. The location is where the Blue Masonic Lodge is now. Okay, and the Root Brothers had our first bands and orchestras here. And they taught little tiny kids how to play instruments. And they'd march up and down the street practicing. And the day they brought electricity there was Thanksgiving weekend in 1900. And we have a lady's 2-page diary note. And it said, the men of Wallowa County brought electricity to this building Thanksgiving weekend, and we got to dance under electricity. They didn't call it lights or power or anything. And of course, Macaulay brought it to his house next, But that's kind of how our power started, from the flour mill that he had up by the lake. And I do not know. If somebody knows, please tell me. So the museum is the red arrow. And then what's the 2-story building where the hydrant, oh, excuse me, it's not the hydrant. Anyway, what was the 2-story building there? I do not have the answer. So maybe somebody knows. Huh? Nope. Nope. Mitchell Hotel will come to in just a second. Yeah. So anyway, if somebody knows, let me know.
Was it somebody just asked?
It could have been a house, because houses were on Main Street also. But I don't know. Somebody might know. And that's how I'm finding out answers anymore, by telling everybody. So this is Macaulay's edition. And if you notice, he named the streets. This is from 1888. So all those streets that everybody lives on, those names are pretty old. So I was deciding how to restore his office. And there was actually wallpaper in there. And in that gold frame, there is the original wallpaper. And then I found in Canada the rest of the wallpaper trim that, it's not the same, but similar. That, where it looks like the wallpaper is torn away, that's shrinkage. The wallpaper was linen. And so I left it so people can see what the 1888 walls actually looked like. And this is Macaulay's office on the right. The left is what the storage room looked like. But everything in there, we even have his tails, his suit tucks in there, and it's kind of fun to see. His typewriter's interesting. It's on the desk. Note that it doesn't have keys that go up. It has a round ball that goes around. And we all think, older people think, that the IBM Selectric 2, which was made in 1961, was the first one with the round ball. No. So the Blickensderfer, which was made in, done by a Danish inventor in 1890, this one's 1890, but he invented it in 65, actually did that round ball. So our history is kind of how we get some things. And it's kind of fun to see. The typewriter up in the top types downward, and it types on Arty-bound books. And Macaulay had that also, which, so the ribbon's on the bottom, and the keys go down.
Well, look at the keyboard they have.
Yeah, that's like you.
That's not an nice QWERTY.
It's not a QWERTY, no. It's called a scientific keyboard layout. And you can't see the letters on the bottom, but they were alphabet. And I have tried to type on it. It is impossible. I've typed QWERTY too long, okay? I'm sure you could get used to it. Isn't that interesting? Mary Mitchell, the Mitchell Hotel. One of the neat things we have is her apron on the right, a lace apron. And she had sterling silver, which is in the top picture. She was a very interesting lady. She didn't want to live on a ranch. She wanted to work. So she had a 3-story hotel that she ran. The first story was businesses, and upstairs were hotel rooms. And it was called Hotel Mitchell, and it's where the community center is. It took up that whole block. And in...
Which way did it face then?
So it faced First Street.
Okay.
And the back where the laundry was is towards Second Street. Okay? But it took up that whole area.
Do you know when it was torn down?
It burned down. Yep. In the early 1900s. Okay. So this is the road in. If you want to complain about Minam Canyon, rethink your thoughts. That is the road into the county at one point where it was one way.
But traffic didn't change.
No, you're right. Some of you might know this. It's been added on to since this picture. It's kind of behind B. Crow B. That whole block was a brewery. So that's Macaulay Street, and that's Main out where it says 100. So B. Crow B is the ice house and storage area. And it was a brewery for a very, very long time, that whole block was. And so it was actually our first brewery here. We think it's TG. It's not. There were other breweries in Enterprise. But it was kind of fun to see what was actually there.
So did Macaulay own it too?
No, he did not. It was owned by 2 brothers, and it's a whole nother line of story. And so when Prohibition happened and we weren't supposed to sell alcohol, they sold what was called near beer, okay, which was supposed to be non-alcohol, but it was 6.9% alcohol when it was tested, and there was a This is one of my fun things. It's a washing machine. And you agitate it by moving your arm back and forth. It takes 1 hour to wash one woman's dress. That's not your petticoats, that's just the outside dress. I love showing it to kids. So, Winds of Chance, you may not know, was filmed at Wallowa Lake Lodge. And you can find it on YouTube. It's a silent movie about the Alaska Gold Rush. But we have some original photos of it and posters and such, which is kind of fun. That's a little hard to see. It's woven hair, okay? It took the family 50 years to make this wreath out of hair, and a tiny bit of it is horsehair. And it grosses most people out nowadays, but it's a very common Victorian thing to do. And I think it's neat to see. Now with my hair, there is no way that you would ever crochet it, embroider it, weave it, or tat it. You can't even get it out of a brush, okay? Yes, yes. And if you see this up close, it is intricate detail. It's just kind of fascinating to see. Okay, another project. You can see sheep and sheep wool. Sheep came into the valley about 1871. There were a few before that. You know, sheep herders and cow herders did not get along in the early days, and that's kind of an understatement. But this is Carl Whitmore, if you know any of the family, with his prize sheep, which you can tell is pretty good sized. So we have a sheep herder's wagon out back of the museum. The wood cutout was done by the new owner of Bronson Log Homes, and we let two little kids name her, the first two kids to see it, and they named her Mrs. Johnson. Well, very soon, Mrs. Johnson will have a baby. I asked the kids, I said, is your last name Johnson? And they go, no. Well, why'd you choose that name? Well, because it sounded cute. Okay? So she will forever be Mrs. Johnson. And
There were a few Johnson sheep owners in Wallowa County.
yes, and I found it humorous because I'm related to them. And these kids were tourists, so there we go. Anyway, I decided to fix it up. If you see where the arrow is, that ceiling is caving in, and you can see the deterioration of the wood and the pipes and everything. And the green arrow, the ceiling, and the red arrow where the ceiling's falling down. And I spent 4 weeks. You can see the green arrow is pointing at linoleum, which was real interesting, guys. It was asbestos linoleum. And it had to go in these special red bags and then go in another red bag and then in another red bag and taken to a certain place in LeGrand. And, you know, it was interesting. And you can kind of see how it's deteriorated and falling apart. It was part of the Krebs family. They used it down in Imnaha, and it was built in 1900 in Montana. They think it was built in late 1889, or 99, and the Krebs family went up and got it in 1900 and brought it down to Imnaha. And they were very kind to give it to us. So after a tiny bit of work, after a tiny bit of work, there's what it looks like today. And it turned out very nice. The drawer, you can see where the table pulled out and they could eat. The drawer to the left of it is the width of the bed. It's almost 40 inches long. So, and the bench where you sit on the left, you can see there's a little bench cut out. That's all storage. And all under the bed is storage. So it was amazing how it was built. And it was built by the Fisher Stagecoach Company, who made one of the Chief Joseph Day stagecoaches. So it was kind of fun. There's another side view of it. And I found out they had burlap curtains, so it's got burlap curtains, and it's strung on a giant spring like it originally was. So we tried to make it as authentic as we could, and it was kind of fun. Stop by and see it. It's open every day, so you can just peek in. We have school kids that come visit us, and they always dress up in costumes, and we have a great time with them. The very end slide, there's going to be, at the end of a drone video, there's going to be a jingle that one of the little kids wrote, and she sang it with an adult, and they did the music, so it's kind of fun. But we get a lot of information from the school kids and what they want to see, and they have fun studying the history and stuff. So it's a great time for everybody. And we usually will get them all in one day from the whole county. Troy came up this year with their 3 students, and they brought us yearbooks for our yearbook collection, so that was kind of cool. When I was talking to Rich, we were talking about me starting out in history, and it's because of these 3 people. Juanita Ramey was an amazing woman. She had an antique store where Ember's Brew House is now, and she had an antique store in La Grande, and she was good friends with my grandmother. And on my 4th birthday, she gave me a teacup, okay? She told me the history of how it was made in Ireland and what factory it was made from, and that was the first day I started nagging people about history. Well, they'd have something, and I'd say, well, what's the story behind it? And I annoyed the teachers so much, they got sick of me. Horace Axtell was a good friend, and so was George Tallchief. George Tallchief was not Nez Perce, he was Osage and the chief of the Osage tribe. But he lived in the area, he lived in La Grande and then spent summers up at the lake, and he ran the state park up there. And I wished I had been as smart then as I am now, because Horace Axtell, some of the other elders, George Tallchief, they would sit around bonfires in the state park and tell the stories of the different tribes they belonged to. And they would tell them from their heart. And you could hear the passion in them. And it made me a lifelong historian and curious, and I wanted to know more. And that's who are my heroes. They asked me earlier when we were setting up the mic who my heroes were, and I told them it wouldn't be the run-of-the-mill people like movie stars or something. It was these 3 people, because they taught me to be who I am today. So that's my little tribute to them. Fundraising projects. Last year, the Hurricane Creek Grange and a lot of local people donated money to allow us to have heat in the building. A number of years ago, the state of Oregon said we couldn't use our wood-burning stoves anymore because they were too dangerous around the tourists, and there were rules against it. And so the stove store in Wallowa helped us procure 2 stoves that heat the old part of the building now. We have no attic space, no crawl space, and we're on the historic register. So we were limited on what we could legally put in there. And it was a challenge, but I thank all of you that helped fund it. They're in and they're beautiful. They look historic. They're propane, yes, sir. This year we're working on raising funds for lighting. A building that was built in 1888 and 13-foot ceilings, lighting is a challenge. Macaulay's office just has that bare bulb, and some of the rooms have old school lights, but they're milk glass, so there's no light that comes through. And we have a lot of bare bulbs and that type of thing, so that's what our funding's going to this winter, is changing that to the clear bulbs. And if you look at the display case on the lower right, that's upstairs. And even if it was a bright picture, the bottom shelves you can't see. So we're getting museum quality lights for inside our display cases, which will help a lot. So, you are always learning until the day you die. Horace Axtell, one of my favorite quotes from him. What questions? I went through that very quick, and I'm sure people have questions about the museum. Anything?
Do you know that photo? I remember.
It's from, I have it in Horner's scrapbook, and it's taken in Lostine. And they just went fishing, and they're leaving, and so in Nez Perce it says underneath,
Do you have any
let's go.
idea and date on it?
1900 is the date on the back of it.
Oh, it is?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah. And we've posted it several times on the internet. The left-hand picture is Horace Axtell.
That right-hand picture in particular, wasn't that published in the Chief?
Wasn't that what?
Wasn't that even published in the Chief?
I don't know if the chieftain published it. I know that in the 50s, when there was a guy who I've lost his name, had a museum here in town, he gave a print to the chieftain, and I do have a copy of that one, of this picture. I don't know if it's been printed in there in modern days.
The meat of the wow on that is, I think if from my knowledge, when it was in Chief, it used Wallowa in the caption, with the expectation that people would.
Oh, maybe. I don't know, but that would be interesting to look up. Goodbye. The end. Yeah. Yeah.
June, is there an elevator in the building?
Yes, we have an elevator that takes you to the second floor, and we have stairs that go up there. The stairs are kind of funny. They're short, low-rise stairs, and when it was a hospital in there, patients would they would have surgery downstairs in what's the Nez Perce room, and then they'd have to walk up to the recovery room, which was upstairs, so they made them little short stairs. Yes, imagine that. We're spoiled today.
Talk about that. When was it a hospital?
In about 1920-ish, and I will say ish because the museum was a lot of things, okay? When it was a bank in 1888 until they say about 1917, but we have checks that were written after that and cashed at the bank, so we know it's longer than that. So there's a little controversy there. But the upstairs was a one-room schoolhouse, so we have slate blackboard the full length of the upstairs. And it was a meeting room. In fact, in one of Horner's letters, young Chief Joseph came back to Joseph in the late 1900s, or 1800s, and came with some braves and met the military, and there were some other people there. They met in the top floor of the museum because it was a meeting hall. And we didn't have that confirmed until we found this note from Horner. And,
The note from Horner explains the meeting?
yes, not in detail, just where they met and who was there.
Okay.
Didn't have the conversation or anything in it. But it was used as a dance hall and meeting center, and the downstairs where the Nez Perce room was operating room. It was the Methodist Church. It was the chieftain. So it's had a lot of uses over the years, and we're really happy the building can't talk and there aren't any ghosts. Okay? The ghost issue is up for grabs because we get all kinds of things from tourists. But yeah, it has all kinds of stories going on. Yes?
Was that meeting with Chief Joseph regarding his efforts to rise for property in the
Yes, is going to be my answer. Because that's the given theory why he was here, is that he wanted land back in the county. And I'm sure that's the topic.
1890. So his last.
99?
Yeah, his last visit, I think, was 1900, and that's in Enterprise.
That was in Enterprise in 1900.
Prior to that.
Yes, when he brought braves with him and he met with the military and stuff. And my understanding in the one in Enterprise, it was only officials that came, not necessarily the military. And I'm still researching that more to find some actual documentation from the time of it. Yeah.
That's the one where the 1900 is the one that pictures exist.
Yes.
I take it that there aren't any pictures of the 1800s.
No, but I'm still looking. I have,
If you find any, let us know.
I will, absolutely. I have thousands of documents still to scan. Yes, sir.
So what period of time did that building serve as the Methodist church?
So the Methodist Church had, before this one was the one we have now, I was almost said the new one. Before we had this one now, there was a short time period where they didn't have a church. And they met in a building that became a school hall. And so it was probably 2 years before this one was built, okay? Before the new one was built.
1907, 1906.
6, yeah, 5, 6, 7, right in that time period. And so they met there for a short period of time. Because remember, the bank was only in that front part where the big safe is and stuff. And if you guys haven't been in the museum in the last year, it's totally changed because you can walk in the bank vault now. You can go in McCulley's office. The kitchen is open, and each room is slowly being restored to its original look.
How long are you going to be open this?
We're open till September 23rd. We're open in the winter by appointment. So we have a lot of locals that will get Thanksgiving or Christmas company, or people that want to see it during Eagle Cap Extreme. And they just call me. My phone number's on the front of the building. Call me, and I do custom appointments so people can see the building in the winter. Yes?
I just want to talk about my house.
Which is gorgeous and historic.
Our house has been in Brian's family since it was basically built. It basically went into foreclosure, but it was built to be a spec building for a doctor's office.
Yes.
And so the first floor was the examination room,
Mhm.
upstairs had a kitchen, and so the doctor would practice on the first floor, and then the second floor was for living. Anyway, one of the things, so no one ever bought it, but it did seem like Joseph back at the turn of the century had a lot of doctors and hospitals. Was Valley Bronx also a hospital or a doctor's office?
No, it wasn't a hospital. Upstairs, there was an apartment that a doctor used for a short time. There's also a house, it's on Lake Street, and it's a blue 2-story kind of colonial look. That was a doctor's office for a short time. And so there were several of them. We had quite a few doctors in the county, and there's great stories about them. One of my favorites is during Prohibition times, you couldn't buy alcohol, but your doctor could write you a prescription. And so one of the letters we have, this woman's husband had some sort of ailment, and his doctor wrote him a prescription. And it was for a gallon of medicine. And the prescription said he was supposed to take a tablespoon every few minutes, and when the container was empty, he would feel better. And the woman's comments was, he felt great when the container was empty. He just forgot to take his shoes off when he went to bed. And it was a gallon of almost pure alcohol. And that's how our people in the county would get their beverages, okay? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was common before there were hospitals, doctors' homes were kind of the hospitals.
It was very common.
But let's see, I'm on East Street, I'm on East and Second, on East and First, I guess. Yeah, before, there's an older 2-story building that's set back. And I've heard that that was a midwifery place at one point.
We had about, that I have seen,
Okay.
about 25 midwife places
Wow,
in the whole county. We had 90 one-room schoolhouses. So for that many one-room schoolhouses, you got to have a lot of midwives. Because back in those days, babies weren't born in hospitals generally. Yeah. I have talked to two people, a man and a woman, they didn't know each other, that were both born in the museum because their mothers had complications. But yeah, kind of funny stories. Yeah, it was right in that period.
And
Yeah.
the wood in our house is exactly the same wood in the courthouse.
Right, right. You know, we have a lot of buildings, like everybody might remember Old Town. That wood in the dining area of Old Town, that was milled down in Wallowa. And it's a specific pattern of milling. And some of Eagle Cap Chalet's old cabins, that was all milled here. And so it's actually kind of historic wood because it was made here in the county. Now the museum, almost all the wood was shipped in from back east. And I was talking to the school kids and I was explaining to them how difficult that was. Because if you wanted to build someplace like the museum, which is called Italianate, that's fancy style of building, was only built in like Chicago and San Francisco and these big places. Okay, so today is 1887 and I want to build a fancy building. Where do I get the hinges from? Where do I get the glass from? Where do I get the frames around the windows, the medallions? Everything but the bricks was shipped in by covered wagon. Remember a little while ago we looked at that Minham Road? Okay, now these 10-foot high doors have to be sent in by wagon. Okay, before you can get to that part, you have to mail a letter, all right, that was taken by horse somehow, carriage, wagon, horseback, something, to back east, like our hinges came from Pennsylvania. So you have to mail a letter asking for the catalog, right? They mail you the catalog. You get the catalog, you decide what you want, you write down your order, you mail your money back there. How long, here's my challenge to everybody, how long did it take for a letter to get from Joseph, Oregon to Pennsylvania? There's your Google research in 1886 or 87. It, not here. Yeah. Once it got to the railways in 86, maybe. Some of it went by horse, still all the way, depending on where the letter was going. But even trains, how long did it take a train to get from the nearest train depot, which might have been Pendleton at that time, may have been, to Pennsylvania? 3 weeks. Pretty good guess. Pretty good guess. It's about how long it took. It was about 15 days, 16 days were their guesses, even if it went by train. And then, by wagon train, bring all the parts out. Now, what if you were missing something? You start all over again, okay? So it's a very humorous thing. Plus, all the bricks were made here in Joseph. And they were made on the ground where the Masonic Lodge is, okay? And that was their brickyard for that project. There were brickyards in Enterprise and Wallowa and such too. But for that project, that's where it was. And I don't know if you've ever made a brick. I never have. But that's a lot of bricks, okay? It'd have to be, and
They didn't,
sun dry.
they cut out, they formed the bricks in molds and then stacked them.
Yep. And it was basically sun dry.
Well, no, they actually lit fires too.
Yeah.
inside.
Yep.
They built around the fire, as I recall.
Yes.
They are fired, yeah.
They're fired, but they're not fired in giant kilns, okay?
Fired in the kiln, they built a good stack.
Yep. Yep. Different
I
than,
think there was a brickyard where the Chinese restaurant is in there.
pretty close to there. Yes, you're correct. Yeah. And I have pictures of that one. Uh-huh. With women in long dresses standing out there helping in the brickyard. I would love to know the rest of the story of those pictures.
While you're We've got this Bly Edgefield Range, which was Joseph Creek.
Right.
A pictorial history, and it's a poor Xerox copy of the thing. And, but anyway, there are pictures of women, smart-looking riding outfits with shotguns, bringing braces of pheasants.
Yes.
And I wondered if and there are also women, doing farm work basically and ranch work. It wasn't, we're led to believe that there was this division of labor and women could only do certain things. But I think also, I just posted this picture of Walt Disney's wife on the Lapway basketball team in 1917. And somewhere I've seen a picture of a women's football team in Halfway.
Right. We had, not halfway, but we had women's basketball and baseball teams here in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and I have pictures of some of those. And but the women here were extraordinary. There's histories of the women like Mary Mitchell. Think about her running a 3-story hotel. I couldn't do that today. Think of the work of a 3-story hotel. The bottom floor rentals, okay? If you have ever rented one business to somebody, it's a lot of work, right? That whole bottom of that entire block were rentals to businesses. The next 2 stories were either monthly or daily motel rooms, all right? I talk to people that have motels with like 20 rooms, and they're exhausted, and they can't find people to work it. Well, she did it all. And she had a restaurant in there. You could go there for fine dining. She used sterling silver. We have her silver tea service and coffee pot and butter dish. And she served elegant fine dining in her restaurant. Can you imagine? Not even today, with all of our, quote, modern technology, would I consider it. So it was pretty amazing what the women in the county did back then. Washed all the bed sheets? Oh, can you imagine? Well, yeah, in that, the guy that ran the laundry was Hop Lee, and Hop Lee had so much time in his day, and I'm saying that kind of sarcastically, that he would do your laundry too. He'd do all the hotel laundry and then your laundry too.
What are his years?
He was about 1900 to about 1911, and then he went down to Union, and the museum in Union for a long time had a shirt of his or a jacket of his on display down there, and he worked down there for a long time. And
Where was his laundry here?
Mary Mitchell's hotel. Yeah, you can look up the Sanborn maps, and I want to say it's 1903, maybe, Sanborn map. And on the very back of her hotel, it shows the laundry on the back of the block. Yeah. Yep. So, amazing stories. So, a neat kind of video ending slide.
And there comes the bank robbery.